Welcome to episode 13, Tow Truck Driving. And Brandon's going to tell us his stories about the synchronistic events that happened while he was a tow truck driver.
This is another one of those episodes where I got to start off by saying there's nothing in life that's not spiritual. So this is an adventure story episode that has some synchronicity in it, has some guidance from above, some of the good stuff we like to talk about on this podcast. But mostly these are some stories, some adventure stories that really impacted me during my time as a tow truck driver. And so I'll start by saying that I was a tow truck driver up in the top of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, initially during the winter, which is where all of these stories take place. And then again, a few years later, Sophia and I ran a tow truck operation out of our house here, which is also up near the top of the Rocky Mountains. Mm-hmm. And so these stories take place in a large flatbed tow truck in the winter in the mountains. And so I was not towing illegally parked cars. I was not the type of tow truck driver that people didn't like to see show up. I was more or less rescuing people who needed help. They slid off the side of the snowy roads, or, just a lot of different things in need of help in the mountains, as you'll see in some of these stories. And so, as we like to do on this podcast, I'm saving my favorite story for last. So stick around for that one. This all starts with, I was kind of always bouncing around in my life until the last maybe 6 years. I finally settled down, but I had been living in Tahoe, moved back to Denver. I was a car salesman for a summer. It was going well. I was pretty good at it, but I missed the mountains. I belonged up in the mountains, so I moved back up there, and I could have gone back to my old job of driving buses for the county, which was a great job. It comes with benefits and all that. But I remember that I had a guy on my bus one time telling me that he drove the tow trucks up there with the blue flames on the front of their white hoods, and that he made way more money than I did. And so, I'm always chasing money. Not always, but when I was bouncing around jobs so much, a lot of it was to, it's a way of giving yourself raises if you can find the next job that pays more than the one you had. So I figured I wanted to give tow truck driving a try. My only experience was driving buses around that same area, but I'm not a mechanic. I'd never driven tow trucks or done any towing. It was a completely new world for me. And I just felt like I got kind of thrown into the mix. There wasn't an official training program. You spend a morning doing some stuff with the handles on the back of the bed and moving it around in the yard. And then you drive around for a day and a half with some of the guys who already work there. And then you got your own truck and you just get thrown to the wind and off you go. So right off the bat, I was still meditating and using the angel board at that time, and a message came through that surprised me because I was not asking about this job, but what came through was, you may not love towing, but it's good money and it's only temporary. And at that point, I didn't know that I wasn't going to love it. I didn't already not love it. So I was like, oh shit, okay, this might be a difficult job. And it was, but I didn't hate it either. It was always an adventure, always new, lots of adrenaline. And that was just a great message to get, kept me going, and it was good money, and it was only temporary. I did it the first time for 7 months during the winter before moving to New Zealand. And then it would be a few years later before Sophia and I did it here, which went for another year and a half, something like that. The first story is a story of manifestation, something that we still do to this day. We have specially designed meditation sessions, you could call them, that are based around the principles of manifesting. And we get pretty detailed about it, but that's just a little general overview. And so I've been working on manifestation in one way or another consciously for a long time. And I certainly was back then. And so one morning, I got woken up to the phone and had to jump in the truck, go do this job. And it was snowing that day. So things were stacked up. It was like you already knew your next 3 jobs you had to rush to before you were even at the one you were heading to. And just running around like a chicken with my head cut off, basically. And got to a point in the morning where I was starving. I was so hungry. And I was like, well, maybe I can manifest some food. So I'm driving to my next job and I'm doing what I was doing is feeling like I already had what I wanted now. It's like feeling like I had this nice breakfast in front of me. And I forget the job I did. It was somewhere in Keystone. It wasn't big. I don't even know if I moved a car. I might have just like changed a flat tire or even done a jump start or something. But the guy comes out of this nice condo in Keystone and he's like, hey, we're making breakfast right now. We're having pancakes. Do you want any?
Wow.
And I was like, what? Yes. And that doesn't happen often doing that job. But, the fact that it happened right after I was doing my manifestation on my way to a job is just pretty incredible. And he brought out a nice triple stack of pancakes with syrup and some sausages on the side. And I was so, so thankful.
Oh my goodness. That sounds amazing.
My next story is not really one of synchronicity, but one of like a heart-opening adventure. I could probably tell you heart-opening or adrenaline, cool adventure stories about towing for multiple episodes, but I'm choosing only a couple of many. And so I'm choosing this one. I had just finished a job of bringing a car down to Denver. And so anybody who's familiar with Colorado, from Summit County, you drive down a highway called I-70. It goes up, down, around, through tunnels, through mountains, and then you pop out in the flatland that is Denver. And I was down there, I dropped off my car, and a snowstorm was rolling into the mountains, and I was heading back through the flatland, just started going up the highway, I-70, and I was the first vehicle to arrive at the roadblock. They were closing the road because of the snowstorm all the way down in Denver. It was closed all the way to Summit County, which is about 60 miles or so. And I was the first vehicle to roll up, and I just stopped at the barriers, and I think it might have been a police officer came over and said, hey, is your company certified by the Colorado State Patrol? And it was. So I said, yes. He's like, okay, go ahead. So I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. I thought I was going to be stuck here for a while. So he let me around the barrier, and I had 60 miles of, I was the only vehicle on the road. I didn't even run into any plow trucks. There was no other people, just me, a snowstorm, and snow piling up because no one was there plowing it. Nobody was there driving through it. It was just me and this snowstorm going through the mountains, which is really cool. It's hard to put into words, but it was a cool experience. And I was, I don't know, at least halfway, 30 miles. I was really up there in elevation. And all of a sudden, I pass a car off on the side of the road that had clearly rolled over. The top of its roof was all like smashed down, crunched down. It was sitting right side up, so I figured it did a full roll, landed right side up, and it was covered in snow. It didn't look like there was any activity or people there or anything, and I was like, well, I better check just in case. So I just stopped the truck and ran over there, knocked on the window, and the door pops open, and there's a young couple in there wearing sweatshirts. They didn't have jackets. And they had rolled their car about 3 hours ago, and they said right away somebody stopped and said, I'll go get you help. We'll be back here for help with you in half an hour. And he said that was about 2 or 3 hours ago. And they had just been sitting there super cold because the car didn't run anymore and they couldn't have heat. And they were just waiting to be rescued. And so I was the one to rescue them. And it was I mean, when he opened the door, I got scared. I like jumped back, like totally not expecting anybody to be in there. But and that was like really early on in my towing experience. So I think that's why it was such like a heart-opening experience to have the opportunity to help somebody who's pretty much abandoned in the middle of the mountains in the middle of a snowstorm. Not really a light situation going on. So that was cool to be the one to be able to help them out. And yeah, we got them in their car where they needed to go, and all was well. All right, so the truth about this next story is that it's a story of manifestation, and I have more to say on that idea, so I will wrap this story up with the additional thoughts. But to jump right into it, my parents were out here visiting from Florida, and it was my day off, and I wanted to show them what I did with the tow truck and my job. And so we drove to the office in Breckenridge, and we picked up a truck, and there was nothing going on that day. And, you know, if there was, the guys who were scheduled to work that day would be priority. And so the dispatcher was like, sorry, hon, you know, there's no jobs I can give you guys, but feel free to go hit the highway and see if you can find work. And, you know, that's something we would do if we were slow. We'd go look for people who needed help. And so we headed out toward the highway, I-70, and we drove 7 miles up to the highest part of I-70 through the Eisenhower Tunnel. And we went through it, and just about a mile or so on the other side is an exit for Loveland, Loveland ski area, also Loveland Pass. And I was just going to turn around there and head back, but on that side of the tunnel.
And I wanted to add that that's the Continental Divide, so it's super high up in super high altitude conditions.
Yeah, I should double check, but I think it's about 12,000 feet, something like that. So we popped out on the other side of the tunnel, and the weather pattern was a little bit different. It was snowier over on the other side of the divide there. And on the exit I was going to turn around on, we go down the exit ramp, and I see a car that had slid off the side of the road. So the ramp kind of goes down and then makes a sharp turn to a stop sign, and then you got to go left or right. And at that sharp turn, they had just kept sliding all the way forward. They had a rental car that didn't have snow tires, and they weren't prepared. And so they were really happy to see me coming down, and they waved me down. And so I pulled them out of the snowbank and I moved them to a safer spot, and I started loading the car. And as I was loading it, another car came flying down that exit ramp and slid off the road in the same spot and hit the snow. And so we got to all, I say got to, like it was a privilege, but we all witnessed it. And, you know, they just hit the snowbanks like poof, and, you know, right near us pretty much. And saw that. So now I had two cars, and so I pulled them out of the snowbank, moved them to a safer spot, and I was about to start loading their car on the back on the wheel lift, and then another third car came down the exit ramp and did the same thing, slid right off, hit the snowbank, poof. And so before I loaded the second car, I went over and pulled them out of the snowbank, and they had four-wheel drive and didn't need to be towed. They just needed to be out of the snowbank. So they went on their way, and I loaded up the two other cars and all the people, and plus my parents were in the cab of the truck. So we had a full cab full of people, and like I forget, like 2 to 4 people sitting in their car up on the deck of the tow truck. And I took them all into Silverthorne, where the weather pattern was nicer and the roads were dry and they could drive from there. And, you know, we got what we wished for. So, you know, from one perspective, you could look at it like we created, you know, people having a crappy day and sliding off the road. But I choose to look at it like we manifested ourselves to be in the right place at the right time for people who would have needed our help and been stuck or stranded or had to wait longer for a tow truck if I hadn't been there.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Just perspective, but manifested some excitement for my parents either way.
Nice.
My last story, but again, it's my favorite story. So this takes place very early on, like very, very early on. A flatbed tow truck has the flatbed that can have a car up there, and then it has, like, some people call it a stinger, looks like a whale's tail or something, coming out of the back of the truck. It's called the wheel lift, and you can lift two wheels on a vehicle that has two other good wheels and can roll, and you can pull a second car at the same time that way behind the flatbed. And so at the beginning, the owner of the company said none of the new guys, I was a handful of new hires, so this was a busy company, but he said none of the new guys were allowed to do wheel lifts. He did on my very first day during that half of a day when I was messing around with the handles in the tow truck yard. I did use the wheel lift to pick up one of the already totaled cars that was just sitting in the lot just to practice one time. But that was it. There was no other experience or training, and he rightfully so said none of the new guys can do this wheel lift stuff or can do any wheel lift jobs until we get, more further training on it. However, one of the early season snowstorms hit. The early season snowstorms up here and the late season snowstorms up here, from the perspective of a tow truck driver and probably even insurance companies, are some of the worst because people are not prepared. They are still in summer mode. They don't have winter tires on. They, maybe driving across country like you'll see in the story. And it's great summery weather everywhere else except for the top of the Rocky Mountains where there's a snowstorm. And people just aren't prepared. And so things just hit the fan. And that's what happened on this particular day.
Also, people coming to ski and snowboard and having rental cars that aren't prepared for the winter months.
Yeah, tons of rental cars without snow tires or four-wheel drive that cause problems. And anyways, so this was one of those storms, and the owner of the company was out. And so when the owner was out, the dispatcher was in charge, so to speak. She was running the operation from the office. We got at least 6 guys out there at all times, and she's getting all the calls from all the different avenues, insurance companies, private. We had the AAA contract, and she can see on the computer screen which driver is in which area, and she's just coordinating the whole operation. And jobs were piling up. And so she's like, okay, you guys, we got to do some wheel lifts today. And so I don't think, knew that we weren't supposed to. And I also don't think she knew what cars that she was sending me to go get. Because, and I didn't know any better, still being new, I didn't know to say no to her. I didn't say, the owner said I'm not supposed to do this. I just said, okay. And so she sent me 2 vehicles. They were both really expensive sport cars with nothing wrong with them at all. They both were just trying to get out of the mountains or through the mountains on that day, and they had really slick, fat racing tires. Like, these cars looked like they should be on a track. I'm not really much of a car guy, so I couldn't tell you, and I don't want to make it up, what kind of cars they were, but they looked like they should be like in a car magazine type cars. Just really nice looking sport cars that had nothing wrong with them. And I know that one of them was a red BMW, and I don't know what kind of BMW, but I do remember immediately looking up both of the cars' values after the job and seeing that the red BMW was a $70,000 car and the other car was between $50,000 and $60,000. And again, nothing wrong with these cars. They just had AAA. We had AAA contract, and they just needed to be towed far enough to where they're out of the snowstorm. Once you get them down to Denver, there's no more snow, and they could be on their way And that's all they were trying to accomplish. So I head over to Vail and I get the first one. It's the $50,000 or $60,000 car. And I pick up the lady. So she's in the tow truck with me. The car is on the flatbed. No big deal. No issue with the one on the flatbed. And then I get over to Frisco, Colorado to pick up the red 70,000 BMW. And I have to put this one on the wheel lift. And so most cars that you wheel lift are front wheel drive, and you put the front two wheels up in the air on the lift, and the back two wheels are on the ground, which is no big deal. So when that happens, you don't need to worry about the steering wheel because the steering wheel can move and the car will stay directly behind you. No issue. And I did specifically ask in training, do I need to do anything to the steering wheel when I put it on the wheel lift? And they said no. But I think they said no because, like I said, 90% of the jobs you don't need to because the front wheels are on the lift. This one was a rear wheel drive car, so I lifted the back wheels and the front wheels were on the ground and were loose because they can turn with the steering wheel. And in my head, that doesn't make sense. You know, when you don't have the training for something, you got to use a little bit of common sense and just, checking my common sense. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I don't get how this is going to work. The wheels are going to turn and it's going to do something weird. But I didn't know what to do. And the guys had said, no, you don't. So I'm out there putting the car on the wheel lift and I am taking my sweet time. And the customer, who was a really wealthy guy from another country who just had a second home in the United States, he was standing there watching me load his car. And since I had no clue, I didn't really know what I was doing, I went really, really slow. And it worked out because he thought that I really, really cared. I mean, I did care, but I just had to figure out, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? Am I doing the right thing? And he's just like, oh yeah, you do really good work. You do really good work. Yeah, you really care. And I'm like, all right, this looks good to him. So cool. I got it up on the wheel lift, got it loaded. And I'm like, all right, let's go hit the highway. So we were on Main Street in Frisco and I pull out of the parking lot that we were in and I take a 90-degree turn onto Main Street and I look in my rearview mirrors and everything's good. The car is perfectly behind me. I'm like, okay, if I just made a 90-degree turn and the car is totally straight behind the truck, maybe I don't need to do anything to the steering wheel. Maybe my common sense, what I thought about it was wrong. The guys were right. I'm good. And I kept a close eye on it all the way down Main Street and nothing happened. I turned onto the on-ramp for the highway and checked again in my mirrors. Everything's good. Nothing's wrong. And I pull onto the highway into the right lane. I merge and I make it about 1/8 of a mile and I feel the whole truck just go boom, just shift side to side real fast. And I look in my rearview mirror and that 70,000 BMW is being pulled diagonally behind the truck, over into the other lane next to me. So I immediately pulled onto the shoulder, which there was hardly any shoulder. I'm up against the guardrail. The car is crooked, and so it's taking up the whole right lane of the highway that I'm stuck in. And it's on a slight bend. I'm in a terrible spot. Maybe I could have kept driving, probably could have, didn't know it at the time, didn't want to just keep driving with this car with nothing wrong with it on the back. And so I pull over and there's 18-wheelers honking at me as they go by because they are immediately coming around, seeing me and having to switch lanes. It wasn't good. If I was one of them, I would have honked at me too, but I'm in a terrible situation. I know it. My adrenaline's through the roof. Both of the customers are in the truck. And I call the dispatcher. I was like, hey, I'm having an issue with the car and the wheel lift. I need help right now. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry, honey. None of the guys are near you right now. And I'm like, well, I need something. I don't know what to do. I'm blocking the highway. Something needs to happen right now. And she's like, okay, well, I'll have one of them call you. So one of the old timers calls me and he does not understand the situation I'm in. He's like, oh yeah, that happened to me once, man. I was driving and the thing just went crooked on me. And I'm like, that's great. Tell me about that later. This is happening right now. I'm blocking the highway. What's going on? What do I have to do? And he's like, oh, all you got to do is you got to just take the seatbelt and you wrap it around the bottom of the steering wheel, clip it in, and then pull the seat back so it's extra, extra tight. And that will hold the steering wheel straight. And he's saying this all calm and slow. And I'm like, all right, great, thanks, bye. And hang up on him. And I go back there and I straighten the wheel and I do what he said and I get back on the road. And all was good. And the customers were in the car the whole time. And so if any of you are familiar with Deepak Chopra, I have read a handful of his books and I had read a bunch of them in recent times. And so this guy who owned that car was on the way back from a Deepak Chopra conference, a 3-day conference in California, driving back to the East Coast where his house was. And of all the drivers he could have got, it's very synchronistic. I feel that he got paired up with me and being, spiritually minded person. So we have a nice ride, the three of us, all the way to Denver. I drop off the lady from Vail first, and then next I drop that guy off, and he's like, hey man, can you mind if I buy you lunch? And so I called my dispatcher. I was like, hey, the customer wants to buy me lunch. Do I have time for that? She's like, sure, you got time for lunch. So him and I went out to lunch and we're sitting there and we just get into this like really deep spiritual conversation about different things that they talked about at the workshop and what I had to add to it. And I was getting chills the entire time. And toward the end of the meal, he slides $100 bill across the table. And he says, thank you for all your help today. I've learned more from you sitting and having this conversation during this lunch than I learned at the entire 3-day workshop.
Wow.
And I just went from like one of the scariest situations of my life to just a heart-opening spiritual connection that I totally see as synchronicity. And I see the universe and my guides smiling down on me with that whole series of events. And, it's very imprinted in my memory and my heart because of how intense it was and how healing the result of it was. This conversation, the $100 tip, lunch, all that.
And he wasn't mad at you that you didn't know how to, do the wheel lift or messed his car up in any way? Or did you mess this car up in any way?
No, I didn't mess his car up anyway, luckily. So
that's good.
Didn't break anything. We could have got smashed by an 18-wheeler or I don't know what would have happened if I kept driving or something, but everything was good. He didn't blink an eye. He didn't care at all. He's probably just like, I got insurance,
yeah,
whatever.
Right.
But I was scared crapless. And yeah, so it took me from a very heightened state of fear to a very heart-opening, loving, accepting myself and being accepted by another and not blamed and safe and all that stuff, which is a great series of events for one's spiritual journey. So just wanted to put those here on a podcast. And if you guys ever are hanging out with me and want some more tow truck driving stories, I got plenty. And I got plenty of friends who have, they lasted a lot longer than 7 months. They're still working. And so they got stories for a long time.
And it's time for our soulful send-off.
Yeah, so what do I want to say from my soul about what's reflected in this episode? I guess a couple of the things that I see, maybe you see more, is to embrace newness. Don't shy away from doing something completely new, even if you're out of your element and there's adrenaline and fear. Another is trust in your guidance. The guidance my guides gave me were something that crossed my mind often during that whole winter, and how heart-opening service to others can be. And then on the flip side, in relation to that last story, it's cool. I guess from my perspective, trust the universe. That's my perspective. But if you take it from that other guy's perspective, show kindness and gratitude to those serving you. That's what that guy did for me. And it was really heart opening, and I guess like feels like it changed me in some way, on some subtle level. So it had a big effect on me, and it just shows the power of the position to be in that guy's role and treat those who are bringing you service with kindness and love and respect.
And now I know why you give the FedEx and UPS drivers apples and bananas and whatever we're cooking when they show up, because you've had those personal experiences.
Christmas gifts and all that. And,
yeah.
I mean, I also worked for UPS for a short period of time, so I know what those guys go through too. It might even be easier to be a tow truck driver at the top of the Rocky Mountains than what they have to put up with. So yeah, thanks for joining us on this episode, and we'll see you on the next one. And as always, we want to thank our Patreon subscribers and
our supporters on Spotify.
And we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Every week, we share our most recent divine guidance in an audio recording called Oracle Offerings. Sign up for only $5 a month at patreon.com/Aspen Roots.